Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. Today I'm joined by Tom Georgens W2SC, also known as 8 Papa 5 Alpha. Tom is a name and call sign I'd heard many times, but it wasn't until I was in Turks and Caicos earlier this year that I truly began to appreciate his operating expertise. The contest crew had suggested that I study Tom's logs as a model for my own entry as VP5E in the CQ WPX phone contest, and they were right. His example made a huge difference. Tom and I later connected in person at Dayton, and ever since we've been trying to line up this conversation. Tom is both a fierce competitor and a skilled station builder, and today we'll talk about both. Q5 Ham Radio is made possible by DX Engineering, trusted by hams worldwide for gear that delivers, whether you're chasing DX, climbing towers, or building your dream station. Tom, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm a big fan of your podcast, and it's an honor to be here.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm curious where you are. Where in the world are you today? Not in Barbados, I take it.
No, I'm actually at my home in Annapolis, so just outside of Washington, D.C.
And tell me how you got started in ham radio. I'm always curious when people began and how they first got that bug to get a ham radio license.
My story, I think, is similar to a bunch of people. My dad was a ham. And actually, his story is probably more interesting. He was, grew up in an apartment in Brooklyn, and there was another ham in the building, and that's how he got interested. And he had no math or science background, and back then, to get a license, you had to, draw schematics of oscillators and all sorts of stuff. And no sooner does he get his license, but World War II breaks out, so there was immediate radio silence. So that was kind of his background. And then he was, they eventually moved out of the city and out to Long Island, and he was inactive for a long time. And when I was around 13, he got interested again. And for me, I was kind of looking for something to do. It was clear that, my professional baseball career wasn't going to happen. And, and I was kind of unmotivated at school, and this just seemed interesting. I always liked to do new stuff and new things. And, it was fun. And I didn't know it at the time, but it ultimately proved to be a major turning point in my life. It kind of gave me some direction. I actually went into engineering as a result of that. I'm not quite sure I would have done that otherwise, and I never regretted that. And it also allowed me to form really a lifelong connection with my dad on another level that we probably didn't have prior to that. So, that whole experience has been really quite dramatic and quite impactful to me.
Well, it's impressive, and I'm glad you told that story. So I'm always curious, did you continue to be active through college and your early career days?
Yes and no. I think, when I was growing up, my dad primarily did DXing, and that's what I did. And I did, a little bit of contesting on field day, and there was Novice Roundup at the time. And I remember tuning in a Novice Roundup on Saturday, and the stations working each other. So that's when I learned rule one of contesting is that 0 Zulu is actually the night before. And then when I went away to college, there was actually a good college station there, and very active hams and contesters, W2UP, K1RU, and there were also two, I guess, godfathers of the contest club there, WA2AAU, which led to W2SC contest expeditions for all those years, and K2TR. So two contest Hall of Famers, living legends, and I learned a lot from them. And so I kind of knew that contesting is something I wanted to do. But, after college, I got married right away. We had kids and stuff like that. So I really wasn't that active for quite a while. We eventually got a house. I did have a tower up, but really no contesting at that point in time. I was clearly just trying to get settled into life, I think.
So when did the contesting bug really hit you? What year was that?
I'd say probably probably like 1990 or so. We eventually, Well, kind of a funny story is in terms of contesting is my wife actually got a license, and she's a ham, and I think part of it is she saw the connection with my father, and she didn't want to be on the outside looking into that type of those conversations, and she got interested and she got a license. So we were in our first house. We had a tri-bander on a crank-up tower, and I wasn't doing much contesting, but they used to have a competition in the WPX that was for novices and technicians. And she won that twice. She actually won 2 plaques. So it wasn't
impressive.
Wasn't long into my contest career where she was already 2 plaques ahead of me. And then eventually we bought a house where I had a little bit more room, and I was able to put up a taller tower. The neighborhood was called Lookout Point, so it was a pretty good location. But it's pretty bare bones. But nonetheless, it was something that I could compete with. I was in W1s. That obviously helped quite a bit. I was in Massachusetts at the time. And I got going on that. And been doing that for a little bit. And then Randy K5ZD moved in not that far away. And so I did a little bit to help him get going on that. And he invited me over to his place to operate. And clearly I was not worthy of a station of that stature. But, we did a couple of multi-ops, and then he let me do some single ops from there. And I ultimately won an ARL DX contest and a CQ Worldwide. So I kind of tied my wife in the plaque total. And I think from then I was pretty interested.
So I don't mean to pinpoint your age, but I am curious, how old were you when that happened, when you met Randy K5ZD and he sort of turned the corner and started winning plaques?
I have to do the math. I'd say I was probably, 35 or so.
I guess, it interests me because, later on we're going to talk about the future of ham radio because I always ask that question and I'm curious. And I think oftentimes there's a lot of focus on getting young people involved, which I think we should. But I'm not at all surprised that people get serious maybe when they're 35 or 40 or even mid-40s because their career is now underway, the family's a little bit older, and I think there's a little more space and time for that. So that seems to line up with my supposition. So you throw yourself into contesting. You said you were in W1, but I don't really have a clear sense of where in Massachusetts you were. Where was that?
So I was in a town called Upton. So I was just right outside of 495, the 495 belt. And so I was probably about 25 miles from Boston. I could actually see the Hancock Tower, the tall building in Boston from the top of my tower. So I was kind of, that kind of range.
So when you built a station for contesting, did that shift some of your mindset about how to build and what to build?
Less so when I was in Boston in Massachusetts. Eventually, when I started on the AP5A journey, I got a lot more interested in station building and particularly station automation. My ultimate goal was to build a no-knobs contest station. and so that's probably where that came about. And, over time, originally I just operated, but I'd say that ultimately where it evolved is that I got as much satisfaction out of building the station as actually operating it. And when the contest is over and, there was a time when I built homebrew amplifiers. So the amplifiers all worked and the software all worked. It was kind of the question, not only how did I do, but how did the station do? So it was a lot of satisfaction in seeing all these homebrew things actually come to fruition.
So since you mentioned APAPA5 Alpha, and this is where I sort of intersected with you, tell me the genesis there. Why Barbados? Tell me the lead into having a home in Barbados and then building a station.
It's not nearly as predetermined and carefully considered as you'd indicate. The way it started was, I had been in Massachusetts, and then career-wise, it actually took me to Kansas. And from then on, I actually never had a home station again. So I had been looking to operate. Randy was kind enough to let me to come back and operate his stations, even though I was in Kansas. But then there was a rental that was available. That was the WP2Z. At the time, it was WP2AHW. And we rented that. And it was for WPX, and it was pretty well set up. I didn't have to do a lot of work, and boom. And what would happen was, operator had a good time, but my wife enjoyed. She was able to go to the beach and, be in the sun in the winter and stuff like that. So it kind of said, there could be something to this. Operating outside the country is fun. Kathy seems to enjoy it. This could be a win-win, and this could be something that could be interesting again. And so we did that. And then the 8P9Z station, made famous by K4BAI and a bunch of other people back in the day, that was also a rental. And that became available one day. They said, we had a cancellation. I kind of jumped on this one. I didn't ask this time. I just went for it. And I went down there for CQ Worldwide sideband. This was like the late 90s. Actually, I take that back. The first time we did that was ARLCW, which actually worked out great. I won the contest. That was a great thrill. Really the first time. I never thought that would ever happen. And then we went back for CQ Worldwide sideband the following year. And the goal was the North American record. At least that was my goal. And so I'm grinding away. I think I'm doing okay. And then I get into the late hours of the contest, probably about 6 hours from the end. and basically everything falls down around me. I couldn't concentrate anymore. I just, whether it's dehydration, fatigue, or whatever, and I basically just collapsed, and I just couldn't finish. It was terrible. It was devastating. So it's like, okay. Fortunately, it was available the next year, so I went back the next year. This time, I'm cranking along, and it was probably about 4 hours from the end, and I kind of come to the realization, you know what, I'm going to break this record. It's really going to happen. And unfortunately, I crashed and burned again. And I'll tell you, that was not only for contesting, that was a total low point in my life. I just felt completely defeated, like I had never been defeated before. And it's like, well, maybe this just isn't my game. So I can't. And interestingly enough, a famous contester sent me a note that basically said, "Don't give up." And it took him 3 tries to set a North American record in his own right. And it kind of gave me some heart. The other thing was I got a message from the owner of this station that this was going to be the last contest operation ever from there. They were going to tear it down. That the maintenance, dealing with renters, presumably like me, it was just too much. And they weren't going to do it anymore. And I remember walking around the next morning after I kind of came to. I was talking to my wife, who tried everything to revive me in fact. I was kind of running out of gas, and she was like doing all the boxing tricks. She was like slapping me in the face. She was pouring cold water down my pants, but it didn't work. And we were walking around. I said, you know what? There's no way I could ever have time to build something like this. What do you think if we said it was possible to take the station over? So I sent a note to the station owner and said, hey, my wife is thinking about this. What, is that even possible since we don't own the land? And he didn't own the land. And his advice was, Tom, don't get involved. I tell you that as a friend. So that was that was his advice. So since I decided that there were some things I wasn't going to do, and he kind of said, well, maybe that'll be workable. So we actually kind of took the station over then. And so the station was on rented land, which ultimately came back to haunt me 20 years later. But, I had the towers and all that stuff, bought all that stuff from him. And went down there this summer. There was a lot of broken stuff. I can't begin to tell you how difficult it is to maintain a station in the Caribbean. It is just relentless. And so I got the station working and did the CQ Worldwide again the following year. And this time I think I was better prepared. Lesson learned, got to be prepared. Dehydration's a big deal, and be ready for what comes your way. And this time I not only took the North American record, but actually won the contest outright. So my first ever worldwide win in a CQ Worldwide. So, it was from the depths of despair to somewhat of a recovery in a year. I can't tell you what an emotional ride that was, but that was obviously a major turning point.
Well, Tom, I've got to tell you, I appreciate you telling that story because oftentimes from where I'm sitting, people like yourself and N6MJ, K5ZD, KL9A are superhuman. And when you tell the story about kind of hitting rock bottom in those 2 contests, I can relate. I was at VP5E and I was so frustrated with myself on Sunday that I just couldn't stay focused and motivated. And I still did well. I was pleased, but I just couldn't understand why I had that mental block. So again, to hear this from you, I think is helpful to me, and I think probably helpful to a lot of people that are listening that are aspiring to do better and to realize that it takes some fortitude to push through it. I'm also interested by what you said, that your friend said, don't get involved. So I was expecting a different end to that story, but you still pushed ahead, which says something about your fortitude and maybe discipline to resolve issues. What was that all about? Were you just stubborn, or did you know how to work through this?
I'm not best at anything, right? Except maybe just persistence. And, it's just one of those things in my whole life, right? I'm a death fear of heights. So climbing is not my favorite, but, it's what you got to do to win. And, in my business career, whether it be public speaking or whatever, those are not my favorite things either, but it's what you got to do to succeed. And it's just one of those things. So, I think, with it just in general, I think I'm persistent if nothing else. I like to learn new things. I like to experiment. But there were some lessons learned. Lessons learned is be prepared. Lessons learned is you got to make the station as easy as possible to operate. Because no matter how simple it is, it's not simple after 40 hours. And, And that was kind of a whole nother vector I took after I got this station stable. So it took a year to get everything working. It probably took 5 years to figure out how to keep it working. And other lessons along the way on that is preparation. I mean, the first time I went down there with some other people that helped me out, but just wasn't prepared. You can't drive to a hardware store to go looking for hardware. You can't. I mean, there isn't that much daylight. And the lesson learned in Barbados is you can't waste a moment of daylight. And anything that you do, try and go looking for something, or going to try to buy something or whatever. I mean, those are day killers. Plus, it rains a lot. So not only do you got a lot of daytime, you got a lot of downtime from the rain. So it was a long lesson in preparation. So now I'm very intensive about lists, doing everything in advance, everything pre-made. And that was another life lesson that spilled over into my work career. I think it made me more diligent and kind of more effective in my professional career. Just being prepared, knowing what's coming in advance, and having some plan to deal with that. So, I think it's just a bunch of simple lessons. I'm certainly, like I said, I'm not overly skilled. I'm just trying to overcome things with automation, persistence, and preparation. I think that's the best I can do.
Okay, so I've got to jump in here. Not overly skilled. I think you said I'm not the best at anything. So for people that are watching this who know you, they know that's BS. I mean, you were the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I want you to just move that camera to that wall to your left for a second so people can see that you are actually the best at well, now we're looking at the ham radio best. But tell me about that. I mean, you had a big job. You obviously were successful within ham radio. Was it just determination and persistence? Or was there more to it?
It's like anything in life. It's, there's a set of skills that we all have, and they matter. I think identifying and taking risks matter. Timing and luck matter. And I think a bunch of things came together to create opportunities for me in good situations. And, I passed on things that perhaps weren't going to work out in my favor, and I took some risks. I moved the family twice. That wasn't easy, and then even doing the contest in the context of work, I did a lot of traveling. Was obviously very, very busy. So to do a contest week meant aligning a lot of schedule things, arranging things for the kids, working through my wife's schedule, and kind of as a funny thing about that is, I get asked a lot, you got this job and it's very busy and it's very taxing. So what do you do for fun? You basically go to some place where you work in grueling hot sun in the rain for 4 days and stay up for 48 hours. Somehow that's the relaxation that you're searching for. And obviously it was a hard thing to explain. And in some ways it was therapeutic because the job is all encompassing. And so if you go on vacation, the phone is ringing, the emails are coming in, you're still thinking about, deals in the quarter and all that other type of stuff. And, likewise, nights and weekends. But the thing about radio, particularly these competitions, was it was the only thing that was sufficiently immersive that it blocked everything else out. I mean, it was just an intense week of just working in the hot sun. I think probably a word here for my wife is that, the promise of working in the Caribbean was her going to the beach while I operated. When I actually owned the station, it was a ton more work. So she got to go to the beach on the weekends, but the days leading up to the contest, she was in the mud and the rain and the sun, holding on ropes and helping me assemble stuff. So there would be no contest station without her. But the therapeutic component was this thing blocked everything else out. And I think there was some mental value to that. That was refreshing and reinvigorating when I got back. So while it was hardly relaxing from a physical perspective, I think from a mental perspective, I think it was very valuable. And the other thing, the radio became, particularly when I started doing all the software stuff, it became kind of a technical outlet. I'm an engineering guy. I like to do projects. I like to do all sorts of stuff. And I wasn't doing that anymore. I was becoming like a technical has-been. And it kind of got me back to my technical roots in a lot of ways.
So I totally get the therapeutic part of it and being able to focus on something other than your job. Beyond that, Was it the competition or the sense of community that drove you, or both?
No doubt it was the competition. The sense of community is very, very, very important. And obviously, as I get older, it's even more important. And one of the phenomenal things about this hobby, I'm sure we'll get to that later, but I love the competition. It's what I do. When I was young, I played sports every day, so I was very competitive in that. And to a point of it probably being unhealthy. Even in school and college, high school, I was kind of lackluster, but in college, it was, I kind of felt like I came from, a small, not exactly the caliber of people that I felt like I met there. So I felt like I had something to prove, and that was a competition for me. And then, business, I consider business the ultimate team sport. And so that was kind of a competitive outlet in some ways. And then radio is a competitive outlet. So I think that's just who I am. And it's kind of my style, is I kind of have two speeds, on and off. And it's on is full on, and off is, you can't rouse me off the couch. Those are kind of my two categories of modes.
So one of the things, Tom, I've seen in talking to contesters, and I hate to categorize them in two groups, and we're going to do it for the sake of this question. There are the people that possibly overthink the contest, and I've been accused of that by the contest crew, of like thinking about everything because of my inexperience. But there's also a younger contester that's really thinking about propagation and getting on early and looking at logs. And then there are people like K5ZD, Randy. And not to say he doesn't think through a contest, but I think it just comes so second nature to him that he can sit down, and I've joked with him about this, he can sit down and do a contest, go mow the lawn, come back, work on the contest some more, go out to dinner, and then win. It's just kind of amazing. I'm curious, with that many plaques on the wall, has it become that sort of routine for you that you can sit down at 0 Zulu and just go?
Not really. I don't over prepare for the contest. I think, you can't prepare for the uncontrollable, right? You can't have 100 plans for 100 scenarios. And as a practical matter, there's more than 100 scenarios. So usually what I do, like for the worldwide, I'll do an analysis of all the multis for the prior year, and I have this grid that will basically have like all the zones by hour, by band, of when they worked the different zones. So I kind of have a sense as to the propagation that they saw that myself as a single op I didn't see, right? I'm not looking for the obscure opening, because I don't have time for that, right? I'm constantly looking for where the rate will be best. So I have that. I have previous years' rate sheets. I usually have probably my two best performances, or certainly the previous year, because that's going to be the closest to what the current year is, and then maybe some high watermark in some prior period of time. And I have them, and I kind of track myself, hour by hour through the contest. And I'll usually make some notes on them about things that are important. When was the first Japan station I worked on, 20 or 40? And that's particularly important in WPX, because you need those multipliers. So I kind of keep a note for myself as to when I actually worked those stations. And so I'm in the right place at the right time. But beyond that, I think, it gets to intuition. You kind of get a sense as to when you're loud, when you're not loud. I'm a believer in moving frequently. And now we operate two radios at once. It's a bit easier to do that. So that, just kind of keep moving around, and eventually you do get an intuition where, you kind of get a sense when things aren't right, when the band is open, where you're in a bad frequency, and eventually you can tell when you're not loud from the Caribbean, is eventually the walls start closing in on you. And that's just a sign that you're just not loud as everybody else, and maybe you should be somewhere else. So I think there's a fair amount of intuition, and that's just the technical side, or the planning side. There's also a personal side. I think while I'm certainly no marathoner, I think staying in decent shape, I think helps. I think good muscle tone helps, so you're not uncomfortable in the chair. A comfortable chair matters. And then just knowing what to expect over the course of the contest. My take is that 48 hours fatigue is not a factor, but my ability to concentrate starts to go away after a certain period of time. And then I start imagining things like, why am I here? What am I doing? And that's a hard thing to explain to other people, but it's real. And I know that when that starts happening, don't let that overtake me. Go outside for a walk, reacquaint myself with where I am and what I'm doing. And then likewise, stay hydrated, get up and move every once in a while, put my feet up every once in a while. So there's things that you learn over the course of 48 hours that make a difference. And I say that in general. I don't know if this applies to Randy. Randy, I literally had to wake up from his nap to operate the WRTC last time. But you just kind of get a sense as to, what your body is doing. And my take is that the 48 hours has gotten, for me, and I'm sure this will change someday, the 48 hours has gotten easier and easier, but the recovery has gotten harder and harder. So it's still 2 weeks before I'm sleeping right again. But the 48 hours seems to go reasonably fast. I'm also a big believer is you got to have a goal. If you're on Sunday and you're saying, oh, only 15 hours ago, only 14 hours ago, it seems like the contest lasts forever. But if you're chasing a target, there never seems to be enough time. So I usually I don't believe in setting targets before the contest because you have no idea what's coming. But on Sunday morning, I take a break, I take a look at where I am, and I try to set a goal that's not unrealistic, that it's demoralizing, but it's aggressive. And then I try and chase that through the day. And when you do that, it makes the time seem to go faster. But I'll tell you, it feels great when it's over.
So Tom, again, there's so many different directions to go in. I appreciate everything you're saying. And I want to go back to intuition because I'm really glad you brought that into the conversation. I think sometimes I focus on preparation, but I just reread Mastery by Robert Greene, and he really focuses in on the intuitive sense that we have after doing something year after year after year. And it's not luck or magic. It's like you've built up this muscle memory over time. So I think that's really important and probably a signal to people like me and others, just keep at it, keep operating, keep showing up and learning more. One of the questions I have for you, do you just play your own game based upon everything you've just said? Does that shift at all if you hear somebody's going to show up in the Caribbean and operate a great station? Do you worry about that happening and do you adjust at all for that?
Yes. I think, part of the game is winning, and part of the game is not embarrassing yourself. And so you don't want to get wiped out. You want to be credible, but it's not like, if N6MJ is on from ZF2MJ or KL9A, it's not like I'm going to invent some idea to increase my score that I didn't think of before. And in some ways, those guys are out of reach. It's just like anything. You don't want to lose to anybody. Those guys are too good. Not that if I was better, I couldn't compete with them. It's not like I'm at some fundamental disadvantage other than my own skill. But you never want to lose to somebody you think you should beat, right? That's my competitive edge. And that's kind of the way I think about it.
So it motivates you.
Yes, no doubt. I think, it brings up this whole question of the scoreboard. And, so I was a late adopter, and basically the reason was I figured I wasn't going to look at it. And the last thing I wanted is everybody else to know how I'm doing, but not me. So it wasn't like I had anything to hide. It's just I didn't like the idea of other people knowing. It's just kind of the control element of my personality. So I eventually did the scoreboard, and it was all well and good when I was winning, but it wasn't nearly as much fun when I was losing. And so now, I'll do the scoreboard because I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's great for the sport. It's shocking how many people watch that, including myself when I'm not operating. So I do the scoreboard, but I don't look at it.
So let's go back to winning again and those plaques on your wall. From what I could see, most of your contest entries now, if not all, are from Barbados. How long has that been the case?
I had like a couple of 160 entries from this location, but I just have a wire in the woods. It's been that way for a long time because, the goal is I want to compete. I want to compete actively. I want to compete at a world level. And it's nice to have a station to go back to rather than rebuilding it from scratch every time. And, one of the downsides of Barbados is that it's in North America by about an inch. It's the furthest east of the Caribbean islands. And I think there was a time when it was actually technically part of South America. But, it hurts on the WPX and the worldwide scoring. So, for all those plaques on the wall, there's a bigger number of contests where I earned no plaque, where I did not win. And the number of times I finished second to a 3-point land station is, it's probably I don't know, 15 or 20. That's clearly an issue, but that's the element. It was I was not going to be able to build a station somewhere else, and this is the station I had, and I was going to make the most of it. And I'll tell you, it was far beyond anything I ever expected when I started on this journey. And then I rebuilt, right? So that's a kind of a whole nother story. And the question was, would I rebuild in 2-point land again? And what I had was I had an infrastructure here. I had a guy who can do tower work. I had a property manager who knew everybody on the island. And as a local ham in particular, AP6 Echo Tango, who knows radio, is a really super guy that I can trust. And, he can kind of keep them aligned about what they're trying to accomplish in my absence. And I wasn't going to have that infrastructure if I went someplace else. And, I wasn't getting any younger and, doing this all myself. So I rebuilt in Barbados.
So with your commitment to 8 Papa 5 Alpha Barbados, were you just not interested in operating other superstations? Have you ever been interested in going to D4C and seeing what you can do from that location?
Well, I think there's probably other people that are more deserving than me to be. That's a high demand, and I think there are other people that more deserving, probably do better than I would. But I think the AP5A, there's the element of the operating, and also the element of the station building, and the station building still matters. I'm still working on new ideas around just new technologies that I can apply. AI voices and things like that. So I'm pretty content. It kind of pisses me off when, somebody that I think I did a better job than scores higher than me. But, frankly, I haven't had that experience, right? I've had D4DX who, makes more Qs, more multi wins, right? I've got no basis to complain. So I really haven't had that experience in quite a while. It is frustrating when it happens, but, I know what the rules are, and, and I signed up for it. And, at the end of the day, the contest is local. Your performance is basically measured against what you think you're capable of. And I think it's a little bit more personal and regional than it is global. And that's kind of the focus thing. Did I do the best I could do? Did I set a new personal best? Did I set a record? Those are things that really drive me. And then, of course, not losing to somebody I think I should beat.
So we keep circling around station building, and clearly you enjoy that. You said that technical aspect is important to you. What do you have in Barbados today?
The antenna side of it is, I wish I could say there was great science behind it, but I basically have 3 towers, and 2 of them are identical. What they do is they've got tri-banders fixed, stacked tri-banders fixed, 2 on Europe on one tower and 2 on US on the other. And they're roughly 90 degrees apart from Barbados, so it's actually pretty convenient. And then I got rotatable 40s on top of that. And then I have another tower with another rotatable tri-bander that I can, cover the high bands in the directions that the fixed antennas don't cover. And also as a fallback in case something breaks. And that's also with the 2 40s as well. And it works great. The goal was to minimize rotation, so I could do a whole CQ worldwide and never touch the rotator. So a lot of that stuff has worked out really, really well. But I've also done a lot of stuff inside the station. The goal was I wanted to build a station, what I call no knobs, and basically operate with the full functionality of a 2 radio station, and only touch the keyboard, every once in a while the mouse, and the RF and AF gain controls on the K3s, and that's it. And so basically automating the amp, everything else basically driven through the keyboard or the mouse. So there's no knobs, no antenna switches, nothing. So basically the desk consists of, the radios, the amplifiers, although I don't touch them, and the computer. And so I don't have, like I said, I don't have any switches, I don't have any knobs, I don't have any buttons, I don't have any of that stuff. Everything is all done through the keyboard and through the logging program. And it makes the station just effortless to operate and minimize hand motion and stuff like that. 48 hours hand motion, all that stuff matters. And so I worked on a lot of that. I've also done a tremendous amount of automation around the logging program itself. So I've written a wrapper around the logging program that does, things that dynamically change the messages based on the rate and stuff like that. So there's, I wouldn't want to speculate how much software is in there. And most of the times it works. It's enraging when it doesn't. It's made a big difference, and it makes the station that much easier to operate. The lesson early on is it's got to be easy, otherwise it takes its toll. And I think the station simplification has helped quite a bit.
So what are you using for logging software?
So I actually use Rightlog. And I know that that's not a, it's not in the mainstream logger, and for a variety of reasons. But the developer of that code, when he retired, most people had moved on from Rightlog, and I got introduced to it by Randy because Randy used it for RTTY originally, and I learned it in order to use his station, and I stayed with it. And over time, the developer of it added, two radio automation. He added a simulator for sideband CW and RTTY. He added SDR integration. He did some stuff with FT8, which I don't do, but that's also interesting. He's helped me quite a bit on the integration of the automated, the AI generated voices. So he's been really phenomenal. So there's a tremendous amount of functionality in that software that didn't exist, I don't know, 5 years ago, and it's been great. There isn't a big user community, so I probably have a little bit more undue influence over what gets done and what doesn't get done. But it also has an external interface, I guess an API in the technical terms, so you can get access to a lot of stuff inside the program, and also set some stuff inside the program from outside software. So it's very tightly integrated with all my other station automation, all the antenna switching, the headphone switching, the 2 radio control, all that stuff. So kind of a long story and a long odyssey, but I don't have I haven't taken a program school since college, but the tools today are so simple to use that that's what I've done. In fact, all that stuff, interesting, I did all that stuff. So when it came time to think about remoting, all the automation was already done. So I actually because remoting, the radio to radio remoting is the easy part. It's all the other stuff that's the hard part. And that stuff had already been done. So I could do all that stuff, and it's all code that I developed myself. And like I said, it's not like I'm a professional programmer. It's just I bought a Visual Basic CD at a flea market one time for $1, and it all started from there.
So you're introducing something that I didn't think to ask. I mean, are you operating contests remotely, or are you usually in Barbados?
The station is fully remotable with full capability. The authorities on the island, the ministry, has granted me permission to do some remote operating while they formulate an overall policy. So I don't have blanket permission. I can't just go downstairs and get on the radio now. But they were nice enough to authorize 3 operations last year. One of them was a multi-2 in NAQP that I did just my wife and I from here. And then also, what was instrumental for WRTC qualifications, I did the IARU last year, and I did the WAECW, which are contests I wouldn't normally travel to Barbados to do. But right now, I'm waiting for clarification for them on the rules. I've had a really good relationship with them over the years. And, I think they're a little bit hesitant. It's not something they quite understand, and they're going through their due diligence now. But the station is remotable. And that's the other thing that's built into Rightlog is remoting. And so I don't have any hardware. The station is the same whether I'm sitting at the chair or remote. All I do is click one mouse button, and so there's no cables to move or anything like that.
So are you using K3 to K3 or a K3 Mini, or how are you remoting in?
So I have I've done all of those. I've got the K3 Zero, I've got K3 to K3, and I've got 2 K3 Minis. So but it's basically all the same idea. And that's why I get asked a lot, are you going to go to the K4 and things like that? And first of all, the K3s have worked great for me. And second of all, if I go to the K4, it's not one K4. It's it's a whole crate full of K4s. And I don't think that's an expense I want to take on at this point.
So Tom, I knew that we're going to run out of time, and I'm looking at the clock here, and I have so many more questions for you. But there's one I want to ask before we end the conversation. That is about the future of ham radio. What's your view on where we are as a hobby today and where we might be a decade from now?
I wish I had the magic words to answer that question. And I know a lot of people are looking hard at it. Certainly, the ARRL, ARDC, other people have got all sorts of ideas. But I don't think there's a magic answer to that. But I will tell you one thing is, in my career, I got to meet some very, very, very accomplished people. And I had the honor of interacting with them and talking to them. But, in this hobby, the people at the very top of this hobby are some of the most impressive people I've ever met and have been in this hobby for a long time. So there's something about this activity, whether it be the technical side, the social side, the creativity side, the innovation side, that basically draws really, really high power people and holds them for a long period of time. So there's some magic in this, and I'm not quite sure what the vector is. Is it just the RF side of it? Is it just the innovation side of it? What is it? But somehow that needs to be preserved. And if you think, it's going to start with protecting the frequencies we have. So certainly emergency communication is an important element of what we do and the justification for ham radio. But another one is I believe that technical education, certainly in the US, we desperately need more people to be going into the technical fields. It was a life-changing event for me personally, ham radio and going into a technical field. And I think, the preservation of ham radio, just on the basis of encouraging more people like me. Now, I certainly didn't do anything groundbreaking, but you get enough people, you're going to get some that will, and just in the aggregate, they will. And I just think that there's enormous value to that as a nation, as a society. And I think that's a compelling version of ham radio. Now, what that looks like, I don't know. I don't think it's going to look like what it looked like in the past. I think it'll be some combination of RF communications, some combination of online, whether it be gaming or social media, and some combination of AI. And it may look totally different. I mean, maybe contesting will move to a totally online experience that will have some hybrid thing at some point. Or I think there's going to be innovation there. And I think it's not going to look like radio as we currently know it. And I think if the answer is, or the comment is, well, that's not real radio, or that's not radio as I knew it, then I think we run the risk of looking like a bunch of Civil War reenactors. And I think some people already think we look like that. So I think, what is ham radio? Is ham radio RF? Is ham radio just communications in general? What is it? And I think there'll be a bunch of different vectors. And ultimately, I think it needs to be driven by the next generation. I don't think people like me are going to dream it up. I think we're not as fluent in the new technologies. We're not as motivated to try something new. But in the meantime, I think, for new hams coming along, I think find a mentor. That's something that I never did. I was way, way, way too introverted to do anything like that. And I still am, except for in certain scenarios. But finding a mentor early on, I think I would have loved to have learned CW better at an earlier age, because I think that's the best time to learn it. And I think that's why I'm not as good as that today as some other people are. But I think I probably could have been into this contesting thing even a little bit sooner if I had somebody to talk to every day about contesting. And I think if there's going to be a resurgence of ham radio, there has to be a group of people similar to that a bunch of us are a part of, that basically form a community. They're interested in stuff. They motivate each other and they keep each other engaged, and they keep doing and trying new things. And 50, 60 years later, they're still best friends. I can't think of any other activity in my life that has created that community and that duration and that sustainability. So there's magic here. It needs to be preserved. And I don't think it's a pure social thing. I think there's something underneath this that holds us all together.
Tom, I think you started that off with, I don't have an answer. And I think that was the best answer I've heard after 150 interviews. So great, really great job with that. It motivates me and inspires me. And I love this idea that maybe people our age aren't going to be the answer. We have to look to the younger generation and let them figure this out. We can't tell them what it's going to look like. Fantastic answer. Great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It was a pleasure being here.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and I've been talking to Tom Georgens, W2SC. You probably know him as 8 Papa 5 Alpha. You will hear him on often in the future. Thank you for joining me.